2,000 years ago, first of all, this wadi was not as deep as now, because every flash flood and every rain makes it deeper. Even today you can get to the cave if you walk on the path on top. It brings you to the cave and you can go in with ropes. But in 1947, this young Bedouin boy was following one of his lost goats. He arrived to this cave, he threw a stone in, he heard something breaking, he went and inside he found 2 pottery jars, and inside he found 7 scrolls, which he had no idea. I just knew that it's leather, and he thought leather is good because you can make sandals to the family. So he went to Bethlehem to a shoemaker and said, here's some leather, make some sandals to the family. And the guy said, no, this is dry leather, it's not good. So they sold it to an antiquity dealer. And one of the pieces got to Professor Sukenik, who was the chief archaeologist of Hebrew University. It was written in Hebrew, and he was able to read it. It was obviously old. He read it in Hebrew, which is quite amazing. We'll talk about it in a second. But he read the same thing, and it had the word Essenes in it. And it was the first time they found something written that is not Josephus Flavius, that has the word Essene on it. Because we had everything about the Essenes written by Flavius, only we never found anything that will say that what Flavius says is true. And here you find this scroll that spoke of the Essenes. Of course, it was very exciting. They went and searched every cave in the Judean desert, from here all the way down south. And eventually, by 1952, they found 11,000 pieces of scrolls. Talking about small pieces or large pieces, which it took many, many years to run DNA tests on all the scrolls, because it's written on animal skin, try to see which one belongs to which one, put them all together, and eventually they came out with 550 different scrolls, which needed to be translated and read and understood. And so the whole thing took about 25 years before they were first published, more than 25 years before they were published. So much that there was some idea that says that there's a conspiracy between the Vatican and Israel not to publish the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they might show that Christianity was actually developed out of these sins, and then something that the Vatican and Israel doesn't want people to know. It was not true, but it just took many, many years, because not only it was written in Hebrew and Aramaic and some in Greek, but also it was written, some of them were written in a secret writing of the Essenes, which was like coded writing of the Essenes. And this whole thing was written on animal skin, like we do write the scrolls, the Torah scrolls that we have in synagogues today. Animal skin, hand processed, then you do lines, and with a feather and a special kind of ink, you write the letters on animal skin. And then before they left, they wrapped all those scrolls and left them in caves around here. In 1900 years, which is very interesting, because those scrolls were put to keep in the caves before the destruction of Judea, and they were found just before the establishment of the State of Israel. Wow. So that's very interesting to think about it this way, about 1900 years, that they were lost and then found again. When they sat and read the scrolls and understood the scrolls, they realized that there's few types of scrolls. There are the prophetic scrolls, where the Essenes talk about the end of days, the war between light and darkness, how they see that war, how it's going to happen, how light is going to win, and so on, what's going to be in the new Jerusalem, the new temple, and so on. There's scrolls, sort of like poetic scrolls, where they write poets and chapters of Psalms that we don't have today. For example, Psalms 151, 2 and 3, which were lost somehow, but we found them among the Psalms of the Essenes. There were historical scrolls where they talk about themselves, what they believe in, what's the regular, how they do every day, every morning, and everything. And there were biblical scrolls where they copied all the scrolls of the Bible, the Old Testament that was existing back then in the Essenes. And then they realized that all the scrolls of the Old Testament were found, except of the book of Esther, which wasn't considered by the Essenes probably a holy book, because that's the only book that doesn't have God's name in it. But the most amazing finding out of the Dead Sea Scrolls was a 9-meter, 27 feet scroll, which is the complete book of Isaiah. And the interesting thing about it is that this was identical letter by letter, from the first letter to the last letter. And that was a very, very important finding, because Cynicans used to say that Isaiah is actually 3 different historical books that at some point were put together into one scroll, because otherwise how can you say that Isaiah is a prophecy? And here you find Isaiah that was written 2,000 years ago, and it's identical to the Isaiah we have today, word by word. Now, the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls from the biblical point of view is that this is the first written copy of the Old Testament that was found ever. And when you compare that to what we have today, it's identical. It shows you that the Old Testament has not been changed over the centuries. It's written in Hebrew, which is another fascinating thing, because you can take the same scroll that somebody wrote 2,000 years ago and read it today. It's the same Hebrew. Give it to a child who reads Hebrew, you can read it easily. Same language that was spoken here in the area, disappeared for 1900 years, renewed again as a spoken language, and now when you find scrolls that somebody wrote 2000 years ago, it's the same language, same words, same letters, same writings. When you compare that to the Torah scrolls that we have today in synagogues, you will see that it's identical, word by word, letter by letter. Even the way they make the Torah scrolls today is same. Animal skin, same feathers, same kind of ink, same writing. This was copied to the point, exactly the same, generation after generation. We'll talk a bit more about that when we see the Dead Sea Scrolls, a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Israel Museum. But this is important. This finding of the scrolls is very important. When they found the scrolls, they also found something that's not written on animal skin. It's a copper scroll that was found on copper. It has 39 indexes where the copper scroll suggests the treasures of the temple were hidden in the Judean desert. And nobody found even the first place because it's sort of coded. Nobody found the first location to continue from and find the others. There's an archaeologist from Texas. I think his name is Wendell Jones, who still looks for that for like the last 20-something years in the Judean desert. This is his lifetime mission. He thinks that he's going to find the treasures of the temple in the Judean desert.
It sounds like an Indiana Jones.
He is basically, actually Indiana Jones is sort of based on him because he is the Indiana Jones type of archaeologist. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the site, this is Qumran. This is a very beautiful area, as you can see, in the middle of the Judean desert. Very important when it comes to understanding of the Bible and making the Bible authentic. Because when you find this first written scroll from 2000 years ago that's identical to the Bible of today, then you have proof, hard evidence proof that the Bible hasn't been changed in the last 2000 years.
Now the question is it only the Old Testament?
Yeah, because this was written before Christ, and so there was no New Testament then.
You said some of it was Aramaic.